Welcome, folks. Come on in. Wonderful to have you here. I'm just so excited to see Phil again. And so as people are coming in, we are here to explore the timeless search for meaning, the art of reviving pilgrimage. And there's no better person on this planet to talk about than the person who wrote the book, The Art of Pilgrimage. And I'm Lauren Artress, and the founder of Veritas. And Phil, I can't wait to have discussion with you. Welcome, Phil Cousineau. How are you, my friend?
Thank you. I'm just back from Paris, so how could I be any better than this?
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm sure that our listeners know you, but I'd like to read your bio because it's so impressive. You know, Phil, I've always seen you not only in the footsteps of Joseph Campbell, but really furthering that work, a myth and all. So I think that's why I want to read your bio for people. So Phil Cousineau is a freelance writer, documentary filmmaker, independent scholar, creativity consultant, and travel leader to sacred sites all over the globe. He has published over 40 books, folks, including several bestsellers such as The Hero's Journey, The Life and Work of Joseph Campbell, The Art of Pilgrimage, which we will indeed return to and talk more about, and Burning the Midnight Oil. His most recent works include The Book of Roads and Live Rejoicing, The Life and Times of Houston Smith. These wonderful, wonderful people who have, led us in the past and into the future. So The Accidental Aphorist and The Lost Notebooks of Sisyphus. As a filmmaker, Phil has written and co-written over 25 award-winning documentary features, including the Oscar-nominated Forever Activists, Stories from the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and the life landmark, The Peyote Road, Ancient Religion in Contemporary Crisis. Since 2009, he has served as host and co-writer of Global Spirit, airing on PBS and Link TV. Over the last 30 years, Phil has worked as an expert on myth in the movies at Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, MLB.com, NFL Films, Smithsonian Channel, Lucasfilms, and Pixar Animation Studios. Phil, that is really impressive.
Well, I'm following in the footsteps of Joe Campbell, who once told me, I love what you're doing with my work, Phil, just make it your own.
Yes.
And that's some of the finest advice one can ever get from a mentor, right? Take what you've inherited, honor your elders, but then make it your own. I think that's what we're both trying to do here.
That's right. That's right. And the make it your own part is really coming through, I think. Let's let people know we've been together in Chartres 2 times already.
That's right.
Fabulous weeks. That's why you're invited back, because they're so much fun and people feel so nourished.
Well, that's the point of pilgrimage, isn't it? I remember talking with James Hillman once, the great Jungian psychotherapist, who said something to the effect, when in doubt, when in crisis, when in the crossroad of life, put the prefix RE in front of all your verbs, because that's what we need to do. We need to revitalize, rejuvenate, reintegrate ourselves. And that, to me, is a wonderful way to think about pilgrimage. We cross that threshold into, let's say, going down the Camino all the way to Santiago de Compostela, or the pilgrimage at Chartres, using the Labyrinth at Chartres. What are we trying to do? Revitalize our lives. And coming out of the pandemic, and knock on wood, we are coming out of the pandemic. I think all of us need to rejuvenate in some way, which is why I'm so thrilled to be joining you again in Chartres. What a gift to anybody who can spend the time with us there as a way to reintegrate their lives. Find some more meaning. A lot of meaning was lost, if you will, during the pandemic. And this, I say in my book, and since then, that this pilgrimage model is probably 60,000 years old. If you take into account the Aborigine vision quests, which I do, they are at least 60,000 years old, and they follow the same model. Someone is in crisis, they need to return to the dream time, go back to the place where it all began, and find some numinous energy from the gods or from the elders in order to move forward again. I think that's what we can do together in Chart.
That's right. And I think we've been at Chart, you know, Veritas has been doing this Walking a Sacred Path program since 1998. So we kind of know the ropes as you do there. And pilgrimage is indeed, you know, perfect for this time right now, because COVID, I think, really is, even now, I mean, we don't even know the fallout from COVID yet around this whole sense of the timeless search for meaning, because people's spiritual compasses have been so reorganized or redirected, and people are trying to find out what way the compass is now pointing.
Right. And yet, hasn't it always been that way? If you examine, if you take to heart human history, you'll find that we have always been in crisis, and pilgrimage has always been there as a kind of handrail for us. Remember, I was just in Paris last week, and I found myself walking by the Tour Saint-Jacques, which is the one tower on the right bank on the Rue de Rivoli, in which traditionally pilgrims met. They were given a blessing by the archbishop, and then they would walk. And if you walked the usual pace of those years, the saunter, that wonderful word saunter, which really means going to the Santerre, the sacred land, you would walk about 20 miles a day, and you would arrive eventually, if your health held out, in about 4 months in Santiago, on the west coast of Spain. And all along that route are scallop shells, which are signs of what you would be given as a kind of a boon when you finally arrived in Santiago. And I've seen those scallop shells in Chartres as well.
Yes, they are there, yes.
I was also just in Saint-Mihiel up near Verdun in northern France, up near the Alsace-Lorraine border. And the local monastery there was one of the pilgrims' inns along the way. You spend a few days in a site like that, and you realize all of the wars that had been waged: World War II, World War I, the Prussian War, wars going all the way back. And yet, what is one of the common threads through all of these periods of catastrophe, of crisis, and the needs for spiritual elevation? It's this wonderful, I call it the vitamin P, it's pilgrimage.
That's right.
When in doubt, adhere to this practice to do what? Find a numinous connection with life again, which is so easy to lose touch with. And I think between the two of us, we'll be offering people in our week together a series of exercises, practices, poems, film clips that will allow them to perhaps pursue one pilgrimage that they might have in mind. But I have a longer goal than that, and that is a piece of advice that was given to me by the great Buddhist Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh when I asked him at a lecture here in San Francisco years ago. A wonderful talk. But what is the truest, what is the deepest meaning of pilgrimage? And he put his hands together like this, and he said, the capacity to return home from a sacred journey and recognize your own backyard as sacred ground.
Right. That's right. And you bring home, your eyes are different. You see the world differently. You see it differently from that. I love the sense of connecting with the numinous. I would use the phrase, the animated spirit, that we're looking to animate our spirits, you know, find meaning. What do we do? What are we here for on this planet? What's moving us? What's calling us? And when you have you talk about the stages of pilgrimage, and it starts with the longing and then the call. So it's perfect. And I hope that people are listening to this with that ear in mind, that when you listen to your longing, when you listen to a call, it means taking some kind of action.
That's where there's an overlap. Thank you. That's a wonderful observation. There's like in a Venn diagram, that period of longing is what connects my work with Joe Campbell, The Hero's Journey, but also my work in creativity. Stoking the Creative Fires is one of my books, trying to help people who are stuck with their creativity. So what is the overlap? It's this period of longing in which our soul is sending out little blips, little signals to us. And I hear Jim Morrison of The Doors' voice in the background. Something's wrong. Something's not quite right. when we hear that tiny little voice inside, I say, stop, take a breath. Think about where you might go and who might go with you. Remember, that's Howard Thurman's wonderful recognition about the journey we're on in life. Where do you need to go and who do you need to go with?
Yes.
Beautiful addition to this, so that it's not just a completely egocentric urge. Who can you go on this course with? So in this notion, the pilgrimage does reanimate, what means what? The original Latin is soul. So it means to bring a little soul and or spirit back into your life, which may not be in your everyday life back in Peoria or San Francisco, Paris, wherever you might be. Chartres is sacred ground.
Yes, it is. It certainly
Sacred ground. And that is one of the common denominators in virtually all of the pilgrim traditions that I have studied around the world and through history. That it's not just to go anywhere. We're not talking about a vacation, which in the parlance often means let's go somewhere and vacate our minds, vacate our troubles. Let's just forget everything. Well, there is a place in life for that occasionally. But to paraphrase the great William Saroyan, the man in the flying trapeze, who once said, a writer is someone who can't write. I love the double negative in there. That is the urging of the soul. I would then extrapolate by saying a pilgrim is someone who can't take the pilgrimage. The vacation is a little optional.
Yeah, you have no choice. You must step forward.
That is the exhortation to be listening to, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's so much, we parallel, Phil, because The Art of Pilgrimage came out around the same year Walking a Sacred Path came out. And they've both been backlisted for so many years. This is the latest, your third edition of this. And that whole sense of coming, these books coming out right around the same time. And in Walking a Sacred Path, I make the difference between a tourist and a pilgrim. And just real simple, the tourists are all taking photos so they can remember they've been there. A pilgrim is a participant.
Beautiful
experience.
I remember your book had just come out when I was finishing the last draft of The Art of Pilgrimage, and I was able to read the beautiful section where you talk about the thread through the labyrinth. So I quote you in The Art of Pilgrimage. And again, wonderful synchronicity. We were paralleling at the time. My distinction between the two is evident in the language that we use. Just now, you used the verb take, which is usually a neutral verb. But in the case of tourism, which is only a word that goes back to Thomas Cook, by the way, as in Thomas Cook Traveler's Checks and Thomas Cook Travel Agency, when he advertised a journey on a train from Birmingham in the north of England down to Kew Gardens in London and then back up again, which is what? It's a circle. So he coined the word tourism to say, we will get you there and then we will get you back again, hopefully alive and well.
Hopefully alive, right.
In that, I found a copy of the very first tourist poster in which he's advertising this, and there's a little line on the bottom of the poster that says, "No surprises guaranteed."
Wow.
Boom. There you have the distinction. Well, I have some sympathy for that because I learned from Anthony Burgess of Clockwork Orange fame that up until the mid-19th century, which is the time when Cook began advertising these flamboyant tours, about half of the world's travelers never got home again.
Wow. Well, that's a high rate. Good heavens.
About 50% because of illness, because of theft, people robbing travelers along the way.
Well, think about our stagecoaches moving across the West to Wells Fargo.
That's right.
Early on, it was not protected. Yeah.
Within that model, however, this is the important distinction for us and for anybody who is considering joining us in Chartres. The general model since Thomas Cook has been, and I'm careful about using the word, but it's been voyeuristic. You look, but you don't touch. You look and you really aren't touched at least too deeply. And within that, is the language that says, I'm going to take a trip, I'm going to take photographs, I'm going to take home some souvenirs. You notice the verb take. It's built right into the tourist model, which is why often someone who's living, let's say like I do in San Francisco, you look at tourists who are coming and just, you can't get into a restaurant, you can't get on a cable car. So what do we say? The tourists are on the take.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The other side of that is the pilgrim who is always within, at least the ideal scenario.
Mm-hmm.
The pilgrim is in a mood and a mode of gratitude. I am so fortunate to be healthy enough, frankly, wealthy enough to take this trip. I have the time. So every moment really in a genuine pilgrim's journey is, whew, how lucky can a guy get?
That's right. Certainly gratitude. So that's so important, Phil. And also, as we now in this day and age look at our carbon footprints and all that was going on, which is important, the tourist is really kind of, again, the taking. Something happens when you're on a pilgrimage. Something happens deep inside. And I think, and of course, the Labyrinth, which I have some photos we can show folks of.
Sure.
You know, the Labyrinth really helps. Really, it's a temenos. It really helps crystallize what is it we need to do in the world when we get back home.
That's beautiful. To finish the thought before then is, with that mode and mood of gratitude comes this notion of the gift. It's in the great journey literature from all around the world. It's in the literature of art and playwriting. In Act 3, when you come back again, you are trying to resolve the story. There's something begins to rise, almost leaven, to use that beautiful old verb, leavens in the heart, that says, I need to bring a gift. I need to leave a gift behind with me. When I'm leading my own pilgrimages in various countries around the world, I will ask people in my last communication before they leave home, bring a gift.
Yes.
Something, a t-shirt, postcards from your neighborhood. Often people will bring, in the old days, it was CDs. You would burn a CD, but at least the shift puts you into a mode of not taking, but giving. Mm-hmm. And this can include, one of my favorite stories in my book, The Art of Pilgrimage, is from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I promise we will have no literary quizzes on our weekend chart, but this is really a glorious, what some are now calling mythologems. It's that gem-like detail in a beautiful story that sparkles. Mm-hmm. And this is it. There's a pilgrim who wanders into the inn in London. What's it called? The Tyburn Inn. Yeah. And he asks the innkeeper, what do you recommend? What should I do as I'm walking for the next few days all the way to Canterbury? And the innkeeper says something that is so psychologically astute. He says, find a stranger and tell him or her your story. Mm-hmm. And then on the way back, after you have touched the relics in Canterbury, after you've had mass, had some kind of encounter there, on the way home, find another stranger and tell your story. This, I think, is so psychologically aware. Mm-hmm. It puts you into a gift-giving mode, and it puts you into story time.
Yes, that's right. It's wonderful.
And I will be encouraging in our classes there in Chartres for us to do that. I'll ask in a very gentle way. It's not necessarily a literary workshop, but I'll be encouraging everyone to think of their encounters on the streets of Chartres. Maybe when we meet with Malcolm Miller, walking around the labyrinth inside of the church, the cathedral, what is happening? What is the story that's unfolding inside of you? Mm-hmm. To me, this is a way to call forth the numinous.
Yes, that's right. And also, I love that in your book when you talk about bring a gift, then you're looking for someone to give it to.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting part. Who am I going to give this to? Who am I going to share this with? And so it's so important and so lovely to think of pilgrimage that way. Phil, would it be helpful for me to show some slides of Chartres at this point?
Please, wonderful.
Yeah, because and I'd like to fill in a little bit of the story of Chartres. It's just brief. We have just a few slides. I wanted to be very selective about this.
Sure.
But let me share this just a moment. Here we are. This is Chartres Cathedral. And This is the famous across the wheat fields where the pilgrims did come. The wheat fields are still there to some degree, but just to share glimpses of Chartres. And this cathedral was built because of the richness of the area. This was the breadbasket of France, and also the grape fields, grape vineyards of France as well. And so you can see in these fields, and Phil, you remember this, looking at this? This is about 8 miles away. And you can see the cathedral here. And again, plowing the lands. This is contemporary now as well. So the whole sense of Chartres being built, and it was there on these rivers, the Loire River, that they brought the stones up. The quarry is about 5 kilometers away, the Beauce Quarry. There were 4 cathedrals in this place. It's debatable, 3 or 4 cathedrals made out of wood, oak. All of Europe was oak grove. And then each of them over the years burnt down, over the centuries burnt down. And then they found the Beauce Quarry and the stone, which has that unique quality of hardening over time. They brought it through and up by the river that surrounds the cathedral. So it's really a lovely place. And we always encourage people to take a walk down by the Loire River, just really a morning walk or an evening walk. And this is just simply the beauty of the city where we are. And we stay in a hotelleria, which is just like, 60-second walk from the cathedral. Just really beautiful. And then this is the city, and you realize that, oh my heavens, there's a city below this. And you haven't seen the city yet in the photos that I have showed. And so here we are. Just take a moment to look at this aerial view. And this is the west facade. This is the most famous and the earliest part of the cathedral. Here's the treasury, and Phil, they're renovating all of this. I guess renovating, renewing, restoring, I think is probably a better word. And then there's this amazing, every night there's a light show. This actually became and is very famous. Tourists come from all over. We're there, we're anchored in the city by this time. And so it's a must-see kind of thing. And this is all projected light onto the cathedral. It started by a man named Xavier Richmond. And so it's all just cast light, and there's all these different moods that happen through the cathedral. This is the north porch. This is the earliest. And these cathedrals were like this in the Middle Ages. What they did when they cleaned the cathedral, they found all these different colors of paint. And instead of painting the cathedral again, what they did is put that into a light filament, which is then projected on to the cathedral. And so this is actually what it used to look like, because this was, again, the house of God. And don't forget, pilgrims never saw a building more than 1 story high. And so here's this amazing cathedral, and you can see the light being projected here in this one. And here's the labyrinth. This is the labyrinth. This is taken through the keyhole, which is called the keyhole. It literally has a big cork. Phil, I don't know if you've seen this, because the roof tours are very rare now. But this is looking down, and the kind of arrows on the right and left of the pillars. And this is the labyrinth put there, inlaid in the floor in 1201, is what John James, the Australian architect, says. And you can get a sense of this. This is the formal name. It's called the 11th Circuit Medieval Labyrinth, which means one path goes around the center 11 times. And this is the most complex labyrinth. There are certainly other designs. And a lot of people say, I've been to Chartres Cathedral, I didn't see any labyrinth. And this is why. Because the chairs are all over that. And that was what we did in 1991. We went in and moved the chairs in order to uncover the labyrinth, which probably, except for times of cleaning or the BBC film there, except for those rare times, It was closed and chairs were put on right after the French Revolution, so about 1792, 93, when these cathedrals became houses, temples of reason. Here's the center of the labyrinth, yes, with the chairs, but you can see the center. It has this one scar here because the center, which was made out of lead, copper, and brass, was pulled up to be made into cannonballs in the French Revolution. A lot of wonderful story and history. And sometimes people think this thing is just kind of etched into the floor, something real easy. The stonework is amazing. Just amazing. And again, this quarry stone, see, this is the only one, there's two, but one is in very bad shape. This is the only walkable one that's left from the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, 23 cathedrals had labyrinths. Here's again more stonework with that. This is the opening of the labyrinth. And here we are. You'll see if you join us, which we hope you do. This is what you'll see for our walk that evening. We have a private evening in the cathedral midweek, and the ritual downstairs. Phil, you've done this.
Yep.
I'll end here. You've done that walk.
Twice.
Yes.
And that's, I count it among my most extraordinary travel experiences. Something new just happened there. And I would ask everyone who's joining in, and thank you again for spending some of your afternoon with us. Lauren and I appreciate this very much. What was happening to me watching this notion of my attention and even my center of gravity rising when I'm looking at the steeple. And that was one of the sacred geometry exercises. Our lives are mired down in the everyday world. Remember, at the time this cathedral would have been raised, the life expectancy would have been around 30, maybe 35. Life was brutal.
Brutal.
And so the purpose of the cathedral was often to raise your spirit, to raise your eye level up into the sky, to the heavens, as it were, and to raise your consciousness, bring it up from the mire of everyday life. So that's one movement. But then there's another movement, and that's the movement the first one is what I would call spirit. The spirit is what allows you don't tell Aretha to get down, you tell Aretha Franklin to get up. But you tell Ray Charles to get down. It's a difference between spirituals and soul music. And likewise, I think in a great sacred site like Chartres Cathedral, two forces are happening in us at the same time. One is elevating our thoughts so that we can think of the wider picture. What is it all about, Alfie? Do you remember the movie Alfie? What's it all about, Alfie? What is the meaning of my life, especially after the pandemic when we lost millions of people around the world? These existential questions were pressing in on us. And this is an opportunity. A week with us in Chartres is an opportunity for us to make some kind of assessment of what happened. Do we still believe in God the same way? Where has our sacred belief system gone since the pandemic? So we raise our eyes up, we raise our hearts to get a wider picture, and then we come down again. When I'm looking at your beautiful photos of the labyrinth, I'm thinking, now this is soul territory. I'm feeling my center of gravity moving down from the steeples, down into that beautiful marble work, as you pointed out. And the labyrinth, in some of them, as in Crete, as we know, in Kenosis itself, probably at least the first archetypal labyrinth that we have, took place in the dark or in candlelit sessions, as we will have one candlelit session there at Chartres. And this is meant to, I think, replicate the movement in our lives from soul, from soul to spirit and back down to soul again. What is moving up and what is moving down in us? The labyrinth is a way for us to think about the path of what? Our own souls.
Well, and Phil, the movement you're capturing in your words is important because it is that. It is the big picture. And the Chartres Cathedral, as you know, houses the finest collection of 13th century stained glass windows believe, and certainly the Western world, but I do believe in the world. You probably can inform that more. And then also, then you have the grounding of the labyrinth, which, and that juxtaposition, I think, is very valuable. The more grounded we are in our lives, the more our imaginations can come into focus.
I like to use the verb oscillate with this, so that the life force is oscillating up into spirit. This is where we become philosophical and spiritual. And then the oscillation in everyday life, the forces of the world, brings that soul force, if you will, back down. And we have to confront mortality, the evils of the world, death, but also the origin of all art.
Yes.
Down in here. And then the oscillation moves up again. The Kundalini, if you would like to call it that way. But I prefer this notion that the medieval cathedral perfected this oscillation in the human condition. In one experience, in one visit to a magnificent site like this, you could feel the energy in your soul. I would call it the soul force. This is what Martin Luther King Jr. used to call it, the soul force. You feel it rise, and then you feel it plummet back down again. In one site, we will be able to experience this over 5 days.
That's right. And we haven't mentioned the crypt. I love your word oscillate. That's great. And the crypt is below the cathedral. And in Chartres Cathedral, it's very unusual because usually the crypt means buried dead people. and Chartres Cathedral and the whole area was so rich that they didn't have to use that fundraising method of, the count of such and such is going to be buried in Chartres Cathedral for some money. and they were so profitable that they didn't have to move that way. So birth is the image. Birth is the central metaphor, not death, but birth.
Well, I know from doing my work on the history of the Olympics in Greece, and so much of my work is centered in Greece, that the Greeks used the word crypt to also describe a tunnel. And the tunnel is what allowed you to go into the stadium to watch the athletic events, but also it led you into the cemeteries. It was considered a place of transition, not necessarily wrong or too dark or too shadowy, but you need the crypt to make a transition from one consciousness to another. And I like to think of the weeks that we have together there in Chartres, Lauren, as weeks of initiation.
Yes.
Everybody will arrive in France with one form of consciousness. Everybody's struggling. What's a wonderful line by Philo of Alexandria, the first century Jewish philosopher, who said, "Be kind to everyone you meet, because he or she is also enduring a great struggle."
Right.
That can change your life just by giving people the benefit of a doubt, which to me symbolically then means everyone is in a constant state of transition, a constant state of initiation. By taking a week like ours in Chartres allows us to magnify that desire. I think it's a desire to move from one stage to another. I have, let's say someone who's considering joining us can say that they have been on a threshold. Do I change my job, my marriage, my vocation? In order to make these important life transition questions, I think we need sacred time and sacred space.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult to make these huge decisions at home in the same ordinary rhythm.
Absolutely.
In my experience, leading groups like this for almost 40 years now, people often say, I could not have made that decision without coming to Ireland with you or to Greece. What is it about that? We are offering a kind of sacred vessel to people. Now is the time to take your crossroad seriously.
That's right.
Through prayer, through silence, we'll have rituals, ceremony, some sacred music, and so on. All of this is to encourage. That's a great French word, right? Encourage, it means heart. Take to heart. Listen to your heart for the next week. Here, because at home, social media makes it very, very difficult to listen to our hearts.
too much distraction, too much going on, too much crisis throughout the world. And Phil, we've gotten that question, and you've just gotten back from Paris. You know that sometimes, and I often see this, I say to people, come to Chartres, and their first is, I couldn't do that. And you know, to give yourself permission to take a sacred journey. But there's been unease, unrest in France. How have you found that?
Thank you for asking. I just spent 3 weeks leading 2 writers' workshops while I was there. And virtually every day I had a note of alarm from home. Are you okay? Mm-hmm. have you braved the barricades as if it were 1789 again? And we were in the middle of the French Revolution. So 2 things. There is a socially significant crisis happening, and that has to do with the French identity. People have lived an entire lifetime working very hard, paying much more exorbitant taxes than in America in order to retire early, in order to live life, not just work ourselves to death. Now, the government is saying that they want to raise the age a couple of years, but the ordinary French person is not so much wrestling with that as with the way it was done. There was a kind of end around, to use a football metaphor, an end around the legislature so that has been enacted, and people were angry. But I think in the elegant French way, can I put it that way, in which it is their right for the last 200 plus years to fight for freedom, to fight for liberty, all of these great French notions. And so the demonstrations that I saw were peaceful. There was a little bit of tear gas, but nothing compared to the violence we have in America. If anything, it was, can I use the verb ennobling? Mm-hmm. Ennobling, yes. To see millions of people across France actually involved in this issue because it is about freedom. Mm-hmm. And they want to be heard, but there was no trouble. You know, there was garbage piled up, but I never lost this.
In Paris too, right? You were in Paris.
That's where I was, in Paris and in northern France. It was still the most beautiful city in the world to me. My eyes just moved quite around the piles of garbage. And I smiled because this is a place where, how can you say, demonstrations are raised to an art form.
Yes, it's their way of life. It's their way of life.
Way of life.
Yes,
and it's actually considered to be a form of social engagement. One quick addition to that: Albert Camus is one of my literary heroes. He inspired the writing of my latest book, The Lost Notebooks of Sisyphus. And he has a wonderful notion, which he said, the artist, the citizen, cannot afford to live in an ivory tower. The ideal role of the citizen is to be, and it's a wonderful French word, engagé. Mm-hmm. It is to be engaged with not only the artistic and the spiritual movements, but also the political, so that the ideal life, like the Greeks had their ideal life, the ideal French life is to be spiritually, socially, politically active. Engaged with the world. Right. And I think in our way, we will be offering something like that at Chartres. It's very safe. There are no demonstrations out there. I hear that there's going to be one rail strike in the 3rd week in May. But that is long before we will be there.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything stretching on before that. And besides, it's a wonderful thing to witness, just in terms of what I think of as the French ideal for the way of life, to be engaged yes. in everyday life.
And that comes from the French Revolution. I mean, these ideas of liberty, equality, justice, they're from the French Revolution. I remember one time I was in a hotel and I was being picked up to go to the airport, to Charles de Gaulle, and they went on strike. And what they did is all the taxi drivers stopped their car, got out of their car, put a black mask-like kind of thing over their numbers, so no one would know their, And then they stood there for 10 minutes and they took it off, got in their car and went away. And it was like, oh, okay. I get it.
Funny, I love that. The way you just told that anecdote is similar to, I think, the philosophy of what the demonstrators are trying to say with these demonstrations. And that is, when something significant happens in Paris politically, we as a people, we need to reorient ourselves. The demonstrations are a way to reorient. What do we really believe? What is democracy?
Yeah.
How much freedom do I have to object without being violent? And the parallel for us is that a week in Chartres, speaking about being in I would call it a mini pilgrimage to Chartres, is a way to reorient ourselves.
That's right. No, that's right.
And coming out of the pilgrimage, this is more or less a social responsibility for all of us.
Well, I think
thinking, feeling human beings. Let's reorient. Let's take a deep breath individually, but also collectively. Who am I now? Do you remember the last painting by Paul Gauguin when he had moved from Paris, which he considered was getting too monochromatic and the art world was too bourgeois? So he got on a boat, he sailed all the way to Tahiti, and he said, "In search of a lullaby of color," which is such a beautiful phrase. And he painted dozens of canvases, but the last one was actually the largest in his career. I think it's at MoMA in New York now. And in the upper left-hand corner of the painting are 3 sentences, questions in French. Where did we come from? Where are we going? Why are we here? Mm-hmm. This is what he was thinking as he was spending his last days in Tahiti. Those, as my old mentor, Joe Campbell, he said, these are 3 very good questions for us to think about in our own personal lives. I would hover those as being at the core of the week we'll spend together in Chartres. This is a time where we take the breath and we say, why am I here? Mm-hmm. What am I doing with my life? Can I identify with my fellow pilgrims? We get 20, 30, 40 people together there in Chartres. You know what? We will be meeting kindred spirits. How often does that happen in life, Lauren?
That's right. And the program encourages that. I think we want to make that point as well, Phil, that besides the seminars in the morning, then we meet in small groups, the kind of affinity groups, people, so oh, I want to go out to lunch. Who do I go out with? There's plenty of people to turn and say, hey, let's go out to lunch. But it's a way, and I love we were saying about the tavern keeper, the innkeeper, find a person to tell your story to. These are the people you tell your story to in our program in Chartres. And so, and then also, some programs, Phil, really pack it in, and every minute's busy. And there's really time to sit down and have a glass of wine at the Serpent and wander around the city, go down to the river. Why? Because it's integration time. It's reflection time. Like you say in your book, take time out to brood. Well, some people don't like the word brood, but there's time for yourself to digest all that's happening in your life, and time for reflection, time for journaling. So it's a very special time for sure.
There's another word I use. I used brood in my book because I heard my grandma Dora's voice come to me. Philip, you are a brooder. Never be ashamed of it. For me, that's when you brood, that's when you bring light and life into the world. But there is another word that I'm inspired by a French philosopher, Gaston Bachelard, one of my favorite philosophers, in which he writes that you haven't truly lived through something until you've gone into reverie over it.
Wow.
And I like to think of a week in Chartres or a week with me in the Greek islands or Ireland, wherever it might be. This is a precious opportunity for reverie. So we have, we hope, an inspiring talk in the morning and a workshop, maybe an experience in the cathedral. And then what's so vital is that we encourage everyone in the group to take a walk along the river, take a notebook, take a drawing book with you, maybe walk with a friend, maybe go on your own. But the reverie is that curious, I'd say numinous space in between waking and dreaming. This is where the human soul absorbs an experience, absorbs some thoughts, some dazzling insights, maybe about Chartres Cathedral itself, and then processes it. This is when it is slowly absorbed into the heart.
Yes, that's right. Yes. And Phil, you talk about in your book, the different stages of pilgrimage. We've named two already, the longing and the call. And then there's the departure, and then what you call the pilgrim's way, kind of finding your way to the airport, through the airport. Then you arrive in Charles de Gaulle. Oh my heavens, what do I do? And of course, all our program outline it. We give people a lot of information and options what to do, and also the ability to choose other people to travel with. If you're coming from Houston, or you're coming from New York, or Des Moines, Iowa, or wherever, and then you talk about the arrival. And then after that, and I'm going to add a little bit more in here, but the last of bringing home the boon or the bacon, kind of, and there's that sense of arrival. Yes, you're unpacking, and people, they have these wonderful. There's this retreat center, folks. As I mentioned, very close to the cathedral, modern, remodeled, singles, doubles, whatever, private bathroom in each one, so people really can have their own space, and that is so important as well. Sometimes people in different models of pilgrimage talk about the ordeal. And and sometimes that happens. Somebody's plane's canceled, and those kind of things happen. And what's so important is, who are you and how do you handle it? And I think that all goes toward arrival and bringing home the boon. Who knows?
To me, that's the heart of my philosophy of travel, but also my philosophy of writing, just of living. What I think it was Henry James who said, it's not so important what happens to you as your attitude toward what happens.
Yeah.
And travel is an extremely good example of this. Either it can break your bones to have a flight delayed and then somebody be rude to you coming through customs, or you can pull back and say, this has happened throughout human history. Yeah. I'm one of hundreds of millions of travelers. Let's put this into context. Okay. We take a breath and we put it into a story. Yeah. Because then when you arrive in Chartres with us, we're asking you, how was your flight? We're asking you, do you have a story?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's great. That's great. Will you use writing and prompts in the seminar?
Yes, I think it's enormously important to take the surface of our travel experiences and then bring it deeper.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes yours. That's when memory actually adheres. Sometimes I call it the Velcro effect. When Velcro helps material stick. When you begin to write and you say, it took me 47 hours to fly here from New Jersey. And this is what happened. I lost my passport. It's the writing of it, which you're smiling now, I'm smiling now. That's when we begin to discover the meaning of something. And remember, that's one of my themes for the week. This is pilgrimage as a model for us to search for meaning. What does it matter? What is the meaning of what's been happening to us? So without having to share it, it's not a writing workshop per se like that, I'll ask people to take notes. What was it like to be in the candlelit procession through the crypt and then listen to the music made just for us in the nave of the cathedral that night? Tell me, put it into words or song or sketch it in some way. In other words, make it your own.
Yeah.
Slowly, we will find again the soul of travel. One of my favorite books of travel may seem unlikely, but it's a wonderful book called Why Do We Draw? And the author's theme is that before the invention of the $1 Kodak Brownie camera in the 1890s, virtually all travelers took pencils and pads And they
Yes.
drew, remember the great French phrase, an aide de memoire. It helped you remember. You weren't trying to be Rembrandt. You were trying to remember. In some ways, the raising of the cell phone now to take a quick photo of something is almost anti-memory.
Yeah, because it's in the cell phone. You don't have to memorize.
You don't have to remember.
Yeah.
You don't even know why you took that photo later on. But between you and I, we'll have some prompts to help people more deeply recall, reintegrate the entire journey because of some exercises that we'll do together. And none of this is high pressure. It's to help everyone individually make this the journey of a lifetime.
Yeah, that's right. And just to be clear, I'll be hosting
Yes.
like I love to do. So I'm providing the bigger container and some information around Chart and the flow of the week and all of that. And your classes over there and our seminars have been just so popular, and people love them because it does have that writing component. It does have that making it your own. So that's really a wonderful week. And I'm hoping that our listeners are kind of thinking, yeah, well, maybe, why not me? Instead of, well, I couldn't do that. Phil, how do you think people should prepare? How would you advise people to prepare for the journey?
Get a beautiful leather-bound journal.
Oh, it doesn't have to be leather-bound.
Well, I'm saying the more beautiful it is, the more likely you are to write something into it. It's not quite a Catholic guilt complex, but it is a bit of a prompt. So bring something to remember or to record. Again, if people know my work, I'm a word hound. I've written books on the origin of words. To record actually comes from the old French, recorder. It means to move something through your heart. That's a very different way of saying, I'm going to record this moment through 10 quick cell phone photos or buy a very expensive souvenir. It simply means to move something through your heart. Why does the light mean so much to me now as it's pouring through the rose window? Well, open the journal. I'll be encouraging people to do this and respond to that question. You don't have to be a writer or an artist to journal, but I think it's part of the preparation in order to remember later on, in order to find the deeper meaning of why you left home. We both remember the great historian of religion, Houston Smith, one of my mentors. He actually married my wife, Jo, and I. He's my son's godfather, our son, Jack. And he once told me that he would begin every day on a pilgrimage by reciting or reading something sacred from that culture. So he said, if I was in India, I might read something from the Vedas or the Upanishads, but it could also be a poem by Tagore or Kabir. And I've taken that to heart. So wherever I've gone in the world, even if I was on a filming assignment in Chile, of all places. So I'm thinking, what would be the equivalent here? And I thought the poetry of Pablo Neruda.
Yes.
Every morning for 3 weeks in Chile, I read something by Neruda. And as Houston signified to me, and I'll try to pass on to our group in Chart, what that does is reorient your morning.
That's right.
By having something sacred. It could be a biblical passage, or it could be a poem by Baudelaire, if we're in France. What it does is draw a bit of a sacred circle around the day and says, this time is special.
Yeah.
My week here in France is special, and I'm going to kind of magnetize it, if you will, with some sacred thought. So it's not pious. We're not talking about that, but something that reorients you and brings you down into a center of gravity. So poetry, drawing practices, music. I'm going to begin every morning with music. I think music is one of the universal languages that helps take us out of ordinary time into sacred time.
Yeah. And Phil, I think the pilgrimage starts the minute you sign up. You know, you start readjusting yourself. You start thinking, okay, calendar comes in on your calendar. Sometimes it's helpful, I think, to mark it into your calendar in maybe color even, and begin to reflect and think, and also kind of big screen open, like what comes across your path once you've signed up. You know, what is it? What's speaking to you? And those 3 questions that I loved, you know, why am I here? What is this about? All of that, you know, to begin to focus on that. And maybe I'm hoping most people have a morning time that they can use that for reflection as they prepare, for sure. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember my last phone call with Joe Campbell when I was going to Paris, and he was here. We had just premiered The Hero's Journey. It was kind of a victorious moment. And he asked, Phil, so how are people responding to our film, right? The Hero's Journey. And I said, Joe, I've taken it around the world. Everybody loves it. But one question keeps coming up. How do you know that you are truly on the journey? Because, and then I paused dramatically, it says, even schizophrenics or disturbed people can fantasize that they're on the journey without missing a beat. He said, ask yourself how much synchronicity is in your life.
Oh, that's a lovely.
When you are
answer.
on the right path and you've made the decision, let's say, to take the journey you need to be on, magical things happen. People come into your life who would not have come in otherwise. And I've used that as a rule of thumb ever since.
That's a great rule of thumb, for sure. I see Dawn's joined us here. So come on in, Dawn. Have we covered everything, or?
Well, it's pretty amazing that the time has flown by. We have 3 minutes left. And I have been very inspired by hearing Lauren and Phil go back and forth here. I hope you have too. I'm so looking forward to hearing Phil and Chart. So please do consider joining us. Thank you so much, Phil, for coming on and being the inspirational person that you are. I think the trip chart is going to be amazing.
Thank you for choreographing us.
And I look forward to seeing you in Chart, Phil. That'll be wonderful. Yes. You know, just it's such a great place to be, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting in that way. So
me too.
Well, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Phil. And then so to be continued is what you're saying, Dawn. So
yes,
take care, everyone. Take care. Thanks for being.
See you in Chart.